Welcome back, everybody. And I always feel the need to apologise because I'm interrupting what I'm sure were some fantastic discussions back at the table. So, for the next part of the summit, we're going to have a panel discussion. So, if I could please invite our panelists to switch their cameras on. So, Dr. Laura David, Dr. Beverly Flint, Dr. Heather Bolton, and Dr. Lisa Monaghan. So that was pretty smooth. Just waiting for Lisa. There we go. Hello, everyone. Lisa, I love your virtual background. Unless you're coming in from a forest there.
I am indeed. It's not virtual at all.
Fantastic. So thank you all for joining us. We're going to have a discussion around kind of looking at the NHS and key workers and how are we doing today collectively from some different perspectives. But could you all spend a kind of minute each and just introduce yourself, please? Bev, if we could start with you.
So yes, I'm Beverly Flint. I'm a clinical psychologist with Camden and Islington NHS Foundation Trust in the middle of London. And I also run C&I Wellbeing, which shares mental health expertise and psychological expertise to businesses.
Fantastic. Thank
you.
And
I probably should also highlight that I'm the wellbeing lead for my trust. That's probably why I'm here.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. And an important role right now, Bev. So
absolutely,
I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. And Lisa, tell us a little bit about your background, please.
Hi, everyone. Like Bev, I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm based in central London at University College London Hospitals. So it's a very large hospital site for a physically acute mental NHS trust. I used to work in mental health trusts and inpatient and outpatient services. And I'm head of the staff psychology service at UCLH. So we've been mobilising a lot of support for our staff before COVID, during COVID, and now continuing again after that. So we've been in the trust for a long time as a team, but COVID was quite challenging for us as a whole, and I'm happy to go into that a lot more later.
Fantastic. Well, we look forward to hearing those perspectives, and thank you for joining us. And Laura, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you. I'm Laura David. I'm an NHS GP in North London. I did most of my training in the London area, in particular in the Royal Free Hospitals. I also have my own business, which is called Smart About Health. It's a health and wellbeing program for corporates, and we raise awareness on a number of topics that are meaningful and relevant in the workplace. But I think the majority of my contribution today is going to be around my experience as a GP, also as a mum and as a patient.
Thank you, Laura. And again, really looking forward to getting into to those perspectives. And Heather, welcome. Good to see you. Could give us a brief intro if you don't mind.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm another clinical psychologist and I work at Unmind. We are a workplace mental health platform. So we're all about empowering employees and employers to look after our mental health through digital tools, and we really take a proactive, preventative approach to mental health. I've been at Unmind about 2 years now, and prior to that, I was also in the NHS, excuse me, for about 10 years. And 7 of those years were spent in a mental health trust working in an IAP service, so improving access, psychological therapy. So great to be here today.
Thank you, Heather, and I'm delighted to hear and see that Unmind was given to NHS staff free of charge as lockdown kicked in. So kudos to you and Dr. Nick Taylor for doing that. Thank you. So I think we've established credentials. We've also established that I'm completely out of my depth in this company, so please be gentle with me. And when we were preparing for this, I think it's important to highlight, isn't it, the kind of breadth of people working across the NHS, and we're talking Europe's largest employer, was it that I think Bev, you might have told me, and the range of roles within that is huge, isn't it? So I think it's also clear from the range of people we've got on the panel that those differences as well. So I think it's really important to call that out. But I guess the peak of the crisis has hopefully passed. I know we're going to perhaps get a second wave, but the real peak of it has passed. So how do you think we're doing from the front lines from a mental health perspective? And Heather, if I could start with you, because I know Unmind have been collecting some data and really keen to hear those insights, if I may.
Thanks, Rob. Yes, so as Rob mentioned, and we rolled out the online platform to all NHS staff. And that was just based on, I guess, our anticipation that it was going to be a particularly tough time for staff on the front line. And we wanted to do our bit to support everybody. And I will put details in the chat just for anyone who wants to access it. So we released it to NHS staff at the beginning of the pandemic. We had thousands of people signing up. And one thing I just want to sort of mention kind of data-wise is we have a wellbeing index embedded into the platform. It covers various aspects of mental health, but particularly taps into things like anxiety, mood, sleep, and things like that. And about 6 weeks into the pandemic, we did some analysis. We were interested in the data we had in terms of what's the impact of COVID. And one of the really striking things was just that compared to other workforces across retail, finance, manufacturing, it was the healthcare staff who seemed to be suffering the most in terms of mental health. And in particular, NHS staff were reporting feeling much less and also a lot less able to cope compared to people from other sectors. And it just felt so striking and probably really indicative of what was going on and the stress that people were under on the front line.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. And Bev, from your perspective as I guess with the dual hats of your roles, but as the wellbeing lead specifically, is that what you're seeing kind of on the ground, and does that tally with your experiences?
It's an interesting one. So I mentioned to Heather when we spoke before that I'm really interested in this data because it doesn't surprise me at all. I think, I do think that NHS workers are incredibly resilient. I think, though, that even before the pandemic hit, a lot of us were on our knees already. We've had cost cuts year after year after year, particularly in mental health. I also think that that we're not particularly good at recognising that we're struggling either. And if we do recognise that we're struggling, our frame of reference is that we're working in the NHS, so we see somebody who is unwell and they're over there, so I'm fine. And so our frame of reference may be slightly warped. I'm talking very generally here, so forgive me for making generalisations. But I also think even if we do recognise that we might be struggling, we're not always great at putting our hands up and asking for help. Because we are supposed to be the resilient, strong ones who are looking after the most vulnerable. So the data that Heather has been able to share with us is some. I was scribbling. I'm going to share it with my trust because this is not coming from me and my warm, fuzzy maternal place as a wellbeing lead and just somebody who just cares. But actually, this is hard and fast data that says, "Hey guys, what are we going to do about this?"
Yeah, absolutely, and I guess it isn't a surprise, Lisa. But what's your perspective on this? And I guess I'm really keen to explore a little bit as to kind of the why. Why do we feel that within the NHS when we're caring for others that we have to be so resilient, and these issues can't apply to us? Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's part of the human condition. I think a lot of us come into work within healthcare and social. We care, just like Bev said, and we want to enact change. And embody love and care for others. And so, but we do find it difficult, I think, to then, mirror that in ourselves for multiple reasons that are no different, I think, from the general population, but that the stressors on those within the NHS has been different and has been very difficult over the last 10 years because of austerity and cuts. And so our baselines for having to hold, not only doing the labour, emotional labour for our families, our friends, but then for our patients, it then becomes a bit too much to do it for ourselves. And so we have to put in that, armour. I'm in the forest, I've got the animals coming at me. We have to put the armour on in order to get through what we need to do every day just by going into work and seeing some of the clients and patients that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And Laura, you shared I guess a particularly good example. When I say good, a harrowing example of the need to use that armour with in your practice. But can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think, whatever has been said already through Bev and through Lisa, it's exactly on point. I can really draw from my own experience, but also I speak for many others who, I've trained with and I've been at medical school with. Lots of people have had similar experiences, and I think this whole concept of resilience and the fact that you are told that you're built in this way, that you are resilient, and in the sense that I think I gave you this example already, Rob, but when you attend a cardiac arrest, for example, okay, I've attended several hundreds of cardiac arrests now in my training and my career, and it is really tough. It's a really harrowing experience that actually, you're never really prepared for. You may have been at one or seen one at medical school, but, as a human being, we're not really prepared to be in that brutal environment where you're actually trying to restart somebody's heart. And most of the time, it doesn't work. And, it really sticks in my mind that I had this really bad set of nights, and working nights already has its own issues with resilience and with coping with that level of sort of shift pattern, and day is night and night is day, and who knows where you are in that circadian rhythm. But we had 2 cardiac arrests on 2 different nights, both young men in their 20s and 30s, and both of them died. And, the whole team was really, really, there for a long time to try and to get these men back to life. And, the minute that you say time of death, and you call it and you say time of death, the job just goes on. Your bleep goes off, and you're on the called up to the ward to put a line in somebody, or take somebody's blood, or go and see somebody else, and you're just told to carry on. And this is a lot of doctors' experiences, and I'm sure it's true for many other people working in the NHS, but you're just told you have to carry on, and this sort of feeling that, what applies to your patients. And actually, as a GP, I talk to a lot of patients who have mental health problems, and we're working through how they can look after themselves, and in lots of other scenarios. But you've often got this underlying feeling that actually what applies to your patients doesn't always apply to you. You come second. There's been many scenarios where, you've been told, right, well, when I was a very junior doctor, if you don't write this discharge summary now, even though you're trying to have your lunch, this patient will be discharged, and then the whole hospital will basically come to some sort of disarray because that patient wasn't discharged in time. There's a lot of pressures on doctors. And I think that it can make you really feel like if you're having a problem, to not share it, to not go and seek help, that it doesn't really matter because you've just got to carry on. It's that kind of mentality.
Yeah. And I think there's a few issues here that are coming out. There's the availability of resource to give people the space and time to do that. And we've mentioned austerity a couple of times, but I think there's also a cultural issue as well. And I think the word resilience is really interesting because I think people misuse that term quite often. They see it as strength. They see it as being tough, that we've got to do what you did in that scenario and then move on to the next one. Whereas actually resilience is around flexibility and ability to be equipped to take the next challenge and deal with that. And often it's about giving yourself the time and the space to recover. So then when the next event comes up, you're ready to do it. And Heather, looking into the Unmind platform, I know there are tools that would help with building those resources. But what other sort of stuff are you seeing coming out of the data? You mentioned the kind of anxiety. Anything more sort of specific that you're seeing?
Again, it's early days in terms of kind of looking at the data. The 2 main striking things are the coping and anxiety, which are both really down in everybody, but particularly in the NHS. And we looked at data for this kind of initial 6-week period. It'll be interesting to see, whether things are changing over time. That's something we don't know yet, and it might be that there is some more optimistic news. There were some interesting results around people still feeling quite connected to each other, which I thought was really nice. and that probably speaks to a lot of the teamness and togetherness that people are probably experiencing within the NHS. Everyone's nodding, which is nice to see. So yeah, I don't want to speculate on data we haven't properly looked at, but certainly we will be looking at it over time, and happy to share it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bev, for me, I'd like to explore a little bit around the kind of, we can take budgets aside a little bit. I think that's a big discussion we could talk for a whole conference about. But in terms of creating environments where people feel able to say, hey, I know there's all of this going on, but I need a break right now. I need to recover. I need to prioritize sleep. I need to just go for a walk for 5 minutes before signing those forms, whatever it might be. I know that's something you'll be working on, but how do we move from a culture where people might feel we can't do that because there's just too much going on, to actually giving people that time, space, resource to really recover and I guess prioritize their own resources?
It's a good and a very, very big question, because obviously I've got a foot in the commercial side, and so I see what non-NHS organisations are doing, and I think we can learn from them actually. But I think we have to talk about the NHS culture. We're about to turn 72 years old in 4 days, I think, and Laura, you'll know what it's like being a trainee doctor, that it's a bit of a rite of passage that you don't sleep for 4 days and you're on shift and, might be using a huge amount of coffee and whatever else is available to just keep going. So there's quite a historical narrative that we need to change, which I'm under no illusion that will change dramatically or quickly. I think what I'm always talking about in my organisation and others is some, like the leadership boards that you have, Rob. So people in leadership positions talking about it, and we have had some leaders in the NHS who have spoken about their own experiences of mental health difficulties. I know Laura has, and also so we've had people talk about being an inpatient and keeping blogs when they're in an inpatient unit in an NHS hospital, and that's incredibly powerful. But that culture of us and them is still there. So I think it will take time. I will happily talk about me if people want to hear it, but I'm very mindful it's not always about me. But I do think that being able to show that you are strong. And I'm with you with the word resilience. So if I'm asked to come in and do resilience training, it's like, what do you mean? Your workforce are resilient. We can take that for granted. What do you mean? Do you want them to work for 16 hours a day instead of 12? No, I'm not going to do that. So it is about just being able to have those conversations. People in positions of power being able to demonstrate their own fallibility. We were human beings before we became psychologists, doctors, whatever we are, nurses. Let's remind ourselves of that. And what was interesting, I'm really interested in what Heather was saying about the connectivity, that when I joined the NHS 20 years ago, it seemed that it was a much more connected place. But over the last, like Lisa was saying, the last 10 years, because of austerity, NHS organisations have been encouraged to behave like businesses and compete with one another. And then you see that same level of competition within organisations, because our resources are so small that it's kind of like, no, we don't want that complex patient. You can have it's kind of, that isn't helping anyone at all. And again, I'm making generalizations, but what we've learned from this horrific situation is that we are, and it's a bit cliched, but we are stronger together and we are connecting more. So we're using technology more. I'm at home with an autoimmune condition, yet I've missed nothing because I can do everything online. And people have got WhatsApp groups, and of course in the early days there was lots of funny memes going around, usually involving Donald Trump, I have to say, that were just doing the rounds and keeping people very much connected. And that's something that I think was really lacking before COVID. So if we can take any benefits from this horrific situation. It's acknowledging that the connectedness had gone, and we need to really build on what we've done over the last few months.
That's that would be a wonderful legacy, wouldn't it? Because I think connectedness is being challenged for a lot of people. But if actually the people within the NHS are finding that they're pulling together and becoming more connected, then that is a brilliant outcome. Lisa, I'd like your view on that, but also you spoke a little bit about the trauma that people will be experiencing. I'd just like you to expand on that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fine. Just I completely agree, with everything that's been said around connectedness, and we don't do vulnerable very well. And I think actually we need to have a lot more open dialogues around our vulnerabilities as humans and what is trained in and out of us within various professions. And so, but that is a tiered, it needs to happen at the top, it needs to happen in the middle, and it needs to happen at the bottom of all organisations. And I think that's the kind of path we've chosen, is that we're trying to support leaders to have the support they need and the space they need to support their teams and others, but also to have grassroots staff conduits to feed back into any management pathways. So we're very supportive of our staff networks in our trust and listening to them and working hand in hand with them around what staff need and how to communicate with staff, because I think actually that is a big issue in trying to have access to thousands of staff across multiple divisions, directorates, different disciplines. And I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but my inbox keeps telling me that I don't have enough room in it. So just trying to keep up on top of emails is so incredibly difficult and can feel so overwhelming. And I think that's the situation we were all in during COVID, is that not only did COVID hit us, but we had all these other overwhelming elements to manage, whether it was just trying to keep on top of what PPE we were meant to be using versus actually what offers of support were out there. And I think it's been great that, like Heather's Our Mind was offering things, and that there's national bodies offering things, but it's how you join that up, how you connect it all and then communicate it so that it isn't overwhelming and people know what they can access and when to access it. Because I think that's the challenge, is really getting everybody in society really upskilled on talking about emotional wellness. We're okay kind of with physical wellness, and I don't know, Heather, whether your data would show the difference that we've found in reports of people's physical wellness versus mental wellness and the different changes in that. But people, we're more comfortable as a society talking about whether we've broken a leg or how many miles we've run or things like that, then actually, my mood is really low today and this is why. And so what we were trying to do really in my service was kind of join together a lot of the offers that staff could engage with and to make it really well known that the support was out there. And I think just fundamentally that had a holding action, that staff who maybe didn't end up needing services but knew it was there, that was kind of enough to help them get through. And then what our data showed was those that really did need help, most of them were coming into our service to get it, which is great, but we were also able to pick other people up who would never have asked for help, but because we were so visible and out there, were able to have these informal conversations that led to slightly more, and so that they could gently be brought in, whereas they might never have ever gone into services and got that support to sustain them. And it is about having all those different levels. So, and I think for us, because I know there's a lot in, being researched at the moment and a lot of discussion around clinical frontline staff. But what we were looking at as a trust is it's not just about our doctors and nurses, although yes, they are very important, but we had a lot of admin staff who were on the front line and also have had a lot of vicarious trauma and difficulties thrown at them that we need to care for as well. We also have a lot of people who, whether they were shielding or working remotely, and doing their roles in that respect, and now having to come back and have different levels of anxiety around that. And trying to rejoin and connect teams again is now kind of what my team are looking at, in how to bring people together that have had very different experiences, to make those experiences visible so that everybody's lived experience can be heard and comprehensively integrated again, to build that kind of that team strengths so that we can all go forward into a second surge possibly, but also to think more clearly about what is recovery. I'm kind of, I think that's a funny bit of a word as well, really, when you look at that. And what do we want this future to look like? Because actually, we've got a lot of opportunities now to make some changes that a lot of us might have wanted to do a while ago, but there were various barriers. But now some of those seem to have lessened, if not completely gone away. So I think it is about that opportunity, but we're in that breathing space at the moment of we need to process, we need to take that time. And I think that's one of the challenges, is really trying to protect time for staff, whether as a team or individually, to take that space to process what they've been through and to come through that and, you know, feel well enough to come back to work or to carry on or just to be in their normal lives.
Rob, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you. So I think you framed the issue really well there, Lisa, and there's a lot we could dive into. I kind of want to just touch on the stigma point a little bit. That you're right, that people are much more able to say, I've got a broken leg and I need to recover from that, or other conditions. So within the NHS and healthcare type environments, how do we tackle that? And Laura, you know, I think I want to come to you first, because I think storytelling has a big part to play, and I know you've shared your personal story. Can you tell us a little bit about that, but also your view on how we can use storytelling to make positive change?
Absolutely, and I do believe that storytelling and also having people in positions of influence. So I'm not saying that I have much influence, but you know, people that are very high up in organizations. I know that's a lot of the work you do anyway, Rob, but having people show their human side and their vulnerability to the rest of the workforce is really important. And of course, this is definitely something that isn't really explored very much yet in the NHS. Like, I know through my business that lots of other companies are exploring it in this sense, but you know, it still feels to me like we're very much sort of in the keep calm, carry on, just keep your head down, and that obviously leads to burnout in a lot of professionals. In my own experience, I mean, I didn't start off as a GP. I actually started off as a surgeon, and I could absolutely see, you know, the path to burnout in that scenario, because of the way that you're expected to perform and to train and to always do more. And that is great, but for me personally, that didn't feel like a choice I wanted to make. So I chose general practice. It gave me the opportunity to have the family balance and the life that I wanted, and develop my outside interests. But I think just to, you know, explain a bit about stigma, and this probably will resonate with other doctors, at least out there, and I'm sure many other people. But in my own experience, you know, after my second daughter was born, I never thought that, you know, it would be me that would have postnatal depression. But as time went on after the birth, you know, I realised that this isn't how things should be. I'd already had another child, and I felt very differently at that time. And as I started recognising the symptoms in myself, even though that's sometimes harder when you're a healthcare professional, even though that sounds counterintuitive, but you know, just to actually sit down and think about it is that first step is very difficult. And then to admit to yourself that actually you're not impenetrable, you're actually a human being, and you're also entitled to have, you know, down experiences, and to have bad thoughts, and you know, it's okay to have these. I realize this now, but at the time it's really, really difficult to process. And I think that the barrier to actually seeking help is very, very difficult to make that first step. So, you know, I specifically remember lots of people might have the same kind of connection with other healthcare professionals, but I know all the GPs in my surgery where I'm a patient. So when I went for my 8-week checkup with my GP, who are, you know, I know, when he asked me sort of very sort of lightly, oh, you know, are you okay? Everything all right? Of course, the answer was yes, it's fine. You know, and without inviting me to really, you know, to really actually feel in a position where I could open up about how I was feeling, how I was struggling, and also because, you know, there was a medical student in the room, and you know, it's just thinking about how we give medical staff the opportunity to voice that they might be struggling. And I'm absolutely fully recovered now, but you know, there were very dark days, and I felt like getting help was a real struggle for me, because I felt like many others would do and would have, that I wasn't entitled to feel this way. I wasn't supposed to feel this way. You know, I see many patients with postnatal depression, and now I have a very different approach when I speak with them. But you often feel like that stigma on medical professionals to be that superhuman that you are told often that you should be. And you know, this whole clapping for heroes, we kind of initially thought it was great, and it has been great, but that superhero complex that you're sort of given, it can actually be really counterproductive when we actually are going to struggle. And as Heather said, you know, we've already highlighted as being a group of professionals who have really struggled with our mental health throughout COVID. So I suppose from that point of view, I want to show my vulnerability as a human, and hopefully help other people feel that it's okay to reach out if you need help, and to recognize and give yourself some time to think about it, because that's the other thing that I've always felt, well, I don't have time to think about myself or what my needs are, so I'll just carry on. And that can lead to crises. So I think speaking out, yes, in answer to your question, Rob, about stigma, is really important, and framing it in the right way to make people feel that they're entitled to have anxiety or depression or mental health problems, or just bad days when they're working in this environment, and creating an environment that supports them and looks after them. And you know, we talked about, I think Lisa talked about having a space for people to relax, and I think that having the opportunity to have a space to relax. I mean, all the doctors' messes that I've ever been in have all been rat infested, slug infested, and you know, you can't get anything apart from water from the tap in there. But actually creating a space where doctors and nurses and all professionals working in these highly intense environments have got a safe space that they can go and spend 10 minutes and recognise they need to unwind, they need to walk outside, or whatever it is.
Yeah, fantastic. We've got a speaker later called Maff Potts, and Maff runs a social enterprise called Camarados, and he tells a story, and he'll tell it later, so I won't steal too much thunder, but he creates these public living rooms where people can go for that safe space and just be peer supported. And he's created some of them in hospitals, and the expectation would be the patients going there to support each other. But actually what they were finding was that the doctors and the hospital staff were going in there, taking their lanyards off, having a cup of tea, and you know, kind of being supported by peers and even patients, and some poignant moments around that. And I think we do need to create those safe spaces, and you use the word vulnerability as well. And I think it is by people sharing stories like you have so graciously done now, and thank you. And it is the kind of the influential and senior people that can create that sort of culture change, that look, it's okay to seek help and say, I'm struggling right now. And having line managers that role model it, that's really important. And we've done a lot of work with the Inside Out Leaderboard, as you mentioned, Bev, in the business world of doing that. I think it's really interesting to see how we can get more leaders in our NHS at different levels that just actually showing that vulnerability. And Bev, how do you think we can do that? I mean, you talk to a lot of the other wellbeing leads. What's your perspective on that?
It's a tricky one, because I think, you know, that actually following on from what Laura what a lot of us have been talking about, that when we're talking about stigma, I think in the NHS, I often talk about double stigma. You are strong, you are looking after vulnerable people, so you can't be vulnerable. And actually, is it, you know, is there a level of conscious or unconscious bias that if you do admit that you're struggling, that therefore, you know, should you really be looking after people? But then the irony is, in our trust, we have recruited some peer workers, so people with lived experience of mental health difficulties, to support fellow service users. And I think what they can do is significantly more powerful often than what a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a nurse might be able to do. Well, maybe it's both and is ideal. And so I do think we've still got a long way to go. And we have had people, you know, we've had people in senior positions talk about mental health, talk about their experience of menopause, which always makes men go, oh. But you know, the reality is it's happening to quite a chunk of your workforce at some point, so get over it. But I think as well that with mental health, that, you know, what you and I know about, Rob, and I imagine, well, all of us do, but getting people to talk about mental health, let alone their own mental health, is difficult. People are so afraid of getting it wrong that they therefore do nothing or say nothing at all. And my background is actually, I'm a psychologist and I specialize in physical health. So I worked a lot in wards and with physical health teams, and most of them were absolutely brilliant, but actually there was a real lacking of mental health education amongst the rest of the NHS, I found. And so I would sit in on some clinics and hear brilliant doctors, cardiologists, asking questions about somebody's mental health that just made me want to swallow myself. It was embarrassing and painful. And so I could understand why the patient therefore was there saying, oh no, I'm fine, you know, doing a Laura. Oh no, I'm fine. No, that's fine. No, I'm completely fine. Yeah, no, stop asking me type, you know, because they weren't enabled. And I just think, you know, there is an education element here. I think mental health needs a lot more. I think in every allied health professional, including medical training, I think mental health needs to have a bigger voice and a bigger platform. But I think, just going back to your question, I appreciate I've been a complete psychologist and gone off on a rant. But going back to your question, is that how do we get more people to do it? I think we can learn from what you guys have done in the private sector. It's been a snowball effect, I imagine, Rob. And that's what we need to encourage that. And now through COVID, we are more willing to admit that we're fallible than ever before. So let's take this as an opportunity to invite people, but without pushing them to talk about it. Maybe you could do an NHS leadership board, Rob.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's definitely something that's a good idea. We had a CFO of a trust on the last one, but I think, you know, getting a more dedicated leaderboard, it's something that's definitely on the agenda, and I'd like to see happen. So I think we've all talked about this opportunity, and there's that great quote, isn't there? Never let a good crisis go to waste. So we've got this opportunity where I think for the NHS, both the profile is really high and there's that level of support. We've also a recognition that actually we're all going to be experiencing a mental health challenge a little bit more. So I will definitely take some questions from the audience, so please do post those. But what I'm keen to understand from the panelists here is, how do we realize that opportunity? How do we go from here, supporting the people that need support, but actually changing for the better? And Heather, I'm going to start with you with that very tough question.
Yeah, it is a tough question. I'm sure I don't have the answers. I guess one is my experience of the more sort of commercial sector. And we did a big research study recently with Reba, an employee benefits partner, and I've actually written down some of the findings. I don't want to get them wrong, but a survey of 151 kind of HR and business leaders, 88% of them believe that mental health will now get greater backing at board level. 80% said more discussions were already happening at management level, and over 70% of businesses were already committing to more financial investments. And I guess they're the sort of things that are happening elsewhere in other businesses, and they're probably the same things that we need to see in the NHS. So more money and more conversations.
Yeah,
but how to make that happen, I'm definitely not the one to answer that question.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that data is helpful in framing the conversation. And I can see Bev's nodding, and I'm going to come back to you in a second, Bev. But Lisa, realizing this opportunity, making positive change, what is your view? What do we need to do?
Well, I suppose from there's a lot of cutting edge systemic practice out there that brings in, from a mental health perspective, the professional into the network of that person and being there as a human, still owning your expertise in that to help people, but really putting the expertise of them in their own lives. And I think that's exactly what we need to be doing within our teams and staff. And having, I think that having a service like my own where staff aren't reliant on local services, that they can get help very quickly, and even that leaders can get advice on supporting staff that are struggling quickly as well, is really vital. But having strong links again back into the community, we've got to join all of this together, I think, because the data absolutely shows us what we need to do. It isn't rocket science, but there has to be a stabilisation, I think, of the NHS and its services before we can start to build.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that sort of government and funding, obviously we're about to enter a very tough economic cycle. Do you think the will is there? What do we need to do? What do we need to do more of to make it happen?
Well, I don't necessarily want to get into a political debate because I think that would take us well past our time. But I think that, overall it's great that some of the data is showing we've got that support. And I think within our own trust, for me, it's about finding allies and at all levels and bringing them together to have those conversations and to make them very visible. And so, I think what we're trying to do is, evaluate what we've got and make sure that that is visible to staff as well as to the hierarchy, but also allowing conversations to happen. So we just did a self-care week and where we did these coffee mornings and had people just talking about their experience and just being a person in that role, in that uniform, and this is what was going on for them. And actually we had a really good response from that, and that's something that I think we'll continue with, because it's that sort of cultural conversation. It's those small changes that hopefully will build up into a larger wave. But it is about, I think, all of us coming together and looking at what power and what privilege we hold and how to use it to attain the goals that will benefit all of us.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm hearing communication and how we communicate kind of between different stakeholders and different trusts and sharing great practice. I'm also hearing, how we're communicating what is available to people so they're aware. Look, Bev, I'm going to come to you last, but Laura, kind of your sort of stargazing and wish list for positive change. What would you like to see happen from here on in?
I think it's really important to recognise that that communication is vital, that we need to know what's available to us, and we also need to know where that's going to be based. For example, we don't want to be seen by our people that we know, for example, and we don't want to share with people that we know professionally. So I think that we've already had this conversation that we should be in a system which meets our needs. So if we do identify with having an actual mental health problem or with anxiety or just a space to talk, we need to have an appropriate service or services and make those services known to the staff, so that people feel that they can engage with that service and it is a safe space and it is an effective service. The other thing that I have picked up on, which has been great, there's been many great things that have come out of working through COVID as a GP and in my local area, with connections between our primary care network, which is how GPs work. Everyone's come together. We've got WhatsApp groups. We've got other ways that we're supporting each other. One of our groups is actually called our primary care network support group. Yeah. I mean, but there is this problem with the information overload, which has kind of died down a little bit now. But it's having the resources in a place but being encouraged to access them, being not just knowing where to access them, but without the right direction, without the encouragement, without the knowing that it's a safe space and there's no judgment for using them, then people need to know that before they will use that. So I think it really comes down to the communication, the availability of what's being offered, having spaces within our workplaces to give us time to rest and feel like we can actually say, it's okay, I need a bit of a break. Yeah. But I do think that there has been a lot of exponential improvement in that within COVID, because it's been an experience that's united NHS staff, and they feel, it seems to me that the feelings out there are very much that of course this is highly stressful, and where we were potentially more individually stressed, we're stressed as a workforce now, and in that sense, we've got the opportunity to express our concerns. Of course, we don't want all doctors and nurses and staff going off on sick leave because they're feeling anxious. So we do need to nip it in the bud and give people the opportunity to converse, debrief, and just speak to each other.
Yeah, fantastic, and I like that, that optimism, but also that I'm hearing that connection come through again, which is brilliant. Bev, a final quick word from you. What would you like to see as a positive next step to move to a better place? You're on mute. No final word for Bev. We've got a few connection issues. So, well, thank you, Bev. You've given us the gift of keeping me more to time. So on that note, I would just like to say to you all, thank you so much. That was a really rich, fascinating discussion. I'm loving hearing the positivity come out, but also framing of the challenge as well. So thank you all for sharing your perspectives and for joining us today.